the late 1980s, the then Somali dictator, General Siad Barre, launched a genocidal war against people in the north of his country. Along with it came detentions, torture, and the mass murder of civilians. In this second of a two-part investigation into these crimes, relatives of those killed work with forensic investigators attempting to identify the remains of their loved ones. And we examine important questions about the prosecution of war crimes in the United States, raised by a case against one of the key perpetrators of these atrocities.
Here lies Somaliland, an autonomous enclave with its own flourishing capital city, Hargeisa. Though a long way off from receiving international recognition as an independent state, compared to the rest of Somalia, it's a haven of peace and stability. But Somaliland also has its dark side. Within living memory, its citizens fell victim to the most savage state-sponsored atrocities. Now, as they try to secure their future, some feel those past agonies should be re-examined and those responsible held to account. This investigation is about truth and justice, about a community coming to terms with the horrors of the past, and an attempt to bring an alleged war criminal to account.
قلب نيدي كما جرت حبيب سامح قلبي كله كما جرو دقيقة سامح.
At the heart of this story are the alleged crimes of a man who once held a high command in the army of General Siad Barre, the ruthless dictator who ruled over Somalia between 1969 and 1991. Towards the end of his rule, Barre went to war with his own people in northern Somalia, now known as Somaliland. Believing them to be supporting a rebellion against his regime, he took revenge by sending in his army. The city of Hargeisa was virtually destroyed during intense and pitiless bombardment. Many thousands were killed and driven into exile. Barre's soldiers, meanwhile, tortured and murdered as many as 50,000 others, most of them civilians, and buried their bodies in mass graves across the region. One of Barre's chief subordinates was Colonel Yuusuf Abdi Ali, also known as Colonel Tuke or the Crow. During the late 1980s, he was head of the Somali Army's infamous 5th Brigade, and notorious for his cruelty. It's alleged that among his many victims was Farhan Warfa, then aged 16, who had been detained on suspicion of stealing a water tank.
Our client, Farhan, was arrested by a group of Somali army soldiers, along with, I think, all the other men and sort of older boys that they saw, and taken to the 5th Brigade. These were men operating under Tuke's command. He and the others were tortured with Colonel Tuke present, standing over him, asking him questions. In the end, while he was shackled, Colonel Tuke shot him 5 times at a point-blank range and ordered his men to get rid of the body. It turns out, because he had been shackled and because the colonel was pushing him over at the same time as he was firing his weapon, Farhan survived, I think somewhat miraculously, and was able to convince the soldiers to accept money in order to be set free.
Now, 25 years later, and with the support of an American human rights NGO, Farhan is pursuing a decade-old legal case against Tuke.
Some of the early amnesty reports on Somaliland.
The former Somali colonel has been living anonymously in the United States since being granted resident status in 1996. It took us a while to track him down to his home in Fairfax, Virginia, where he now works as a humble security guard. But when we found him, he was reluctant to discuss the allegations against him.
I think that's him.
Assalamu alaikum.
Good morning.
Assalamu alaikum. I want to ask you. I want to ask you about allegations and Gabile against you in the court case.
No comment, no comment.
We're from AlJazera.
Talk to the lawyer. Talk to my lawyer.
Did you shoot Mr. Warfare 5 times?
No comment.
I understand the SNM was attacking. You were very angry, right? Is this what happened? Just explain to us.
No comment.
Is it a conspiracy? Is the government in the north just trying to get you? But please
talk to
tell
my
me.
lawyer.
Tell
Talk
me.
to my lawyer.
Tell me, is it a conspiracy?
Don't touch
Is
me.
it a conspiracy? Is it a conspiracy?
Don't touch me.
What do you have to say? We're giving you a chance now to
Don't touch
respond
me.
to the allegations. I
Don't
will not
touch me.
touch you. I will not touch you.
No comment. No comment. Talk to my lawyer. That's it.
Don't you want people to hear you first?
But the former Colonel Yuusuf Abdi Ali, or 2K, as many of his accusers call him, was disinclined to talk. His lawyer was quick to refute atrocity charges, which he says are politically motivated.
I don't think that there is any real uncontrovertible evidence to support the notion that my client was involved in any war crimes. All these allegations, interestingly, come from people who have an agenda. Now you can say, well, the individual plaintiff, he might not have an agenda, he might just be some ordinary person, but he lives in a regime that's not entirely free, and it's our contention that he was pressured into pursuing these claims.
This being a civil rather than a criminal case, the allegations against 2K have only been laid on behalf of one man. But as we found back in Somaliland, many relatives of the victims of Siad Barre's war on his own people see the case as a chance to get justice for them all. One such person is Ahmed Musa. He told us he'd witnessed his brother being burnt alive by a man who looks very much like 2K. The horror of the moment was even documented in a photograph.
qof saa loo eegi karayba muuhayna wuxuu ahaa un lafa saa isku sursuran oo wada gubtay oo wada bislaadeen bu waxaan odhan karaa qof lagu tilmaamo maalintaa la dili doono muuhayn.
Ahmed had been shackled to his brother at the time, and they were both to be executed the next day.
waa lagu dilaya waan lahaa qacantaa iyo qacantaasaan iskaga xidhnay deedna markii la yidhi dil waa iminkaa la duuta yidhahdeen isagana xaggaasay u dhaqaajiyeen anigana xaggaasa la dhaqaajiy isla intaanan gaadhin geedkaasoo kale ayaa bababababac rasaasti.
For reasons that remain unclear, Ahmed was freed while his brother was murdered.
sawirradan kan iyo kuwo kale oo jiraba sawirro iyagu waa iska qaadeen weeyaan maaha sawirro cid kale ka qaaday iyagaa iska qaado ku faanayay darajay ku heli jireen waxaan mogti dadkii oonu gubayno maxay oonu xasuuqayno waxaan darajay ku heli jireen mogti وحاجة صارت درجة كجيل جرين تجو وشوي ها تجو سجى وضن كان يستي مركز وضن كان سجى يستي وحي وضننا وكسبنا عسكري وحها مضحى وحي وضن تكت هو اللي يري أمر لوسي ضد كنا وحلول لين يسد قبيلة هم ما هنسي دنبيا أنباش شرعية لو وجمع هنسي قبائل وبدت كلول ليني.
Have you ever seen this picture? It's a picture of your client burning a man.
You know, this is a picture that I have seen before because it's on the internet, and it's a picture that my client disputes the authenticity of, and it appears to have been photoshopped. It's a picture that has just been thrown up on the internet, and I just do not agree that it's an authentic picture. I have never even heard of the name of whomever supposedly took the picture, and there's also the issue of the uniforms involved here that are being worn. That Colonel Ali was not presiding over any kind of burning of anybody, and he disputes the authenticity of that picture. What I can tell you about my client is that my client has not gotten so much as a parking ticket since he's been in the United States.
But even as the dispute over the claims that are bringing Tuke to court in the US goes on, in Somaliland there's a parallel effort underway to recover and collate crucial evidence and provide closure to a community still traumatized by events of 25 years ago. Peruvian forensic archaeologist Jose Pablo Baraybar runs an NGO called IPAF. It investigates suspected war crime sites with the help of a team of international volunteers. For weeks, they've been painstakingly exhuming one of the many mass graves still to be found around the village of Arapsio, near Gabile, a town close to the Somaliland capital, Hargeisa. Gabile is where Colonel Tuke and his 5th Brigade were stationed.
Priority is giving answers. Okay? The priority is putting people to rest, once for all. The priority is for people to know what happened to the relatives. That is priority. That's the most important thing. However, through this process, maybe justice also finds enough evidence to indict this person for serious crimes.
Different people, I think, have different aims, but the broadest aim is humanitarian. It's identifying the disappeared and connecting them back with their families. It only occurred later, chatting with Jose, that it would be possible to look into some of the graves associated with Colonel Ali's reign of terror in Gabile. That work, I don't know if it's going to ultimately be presented in court or not. If we were permitted to present war crimes and crimes against humanity claims, it would have a more obvious relevance, and we're just going to have to see, what the evidence is that he's able to collect and whether it's going to be something that we try to introduce in our case or not.
But the exhumation of grave sites has proved controversial in Somaliland. Relatives of the missing are very reluctant to see their loved ones' bodies disturbed and to revisit the trauma of the past. Jose Pablo and IPAF are under extreme pressure to finish examining the bones they have uncovered so that they can be quickly reinterred. What usually takes months must now be completed within days. Today they have invited local religious leaders to prepare the remains for a final, dignified burial.
Before we bring the remains, I wanted to show you how we have been working. We have been dressing this skeleton to understand where the shots are. If it's from here to here or from here to here. And you can see the body of the sheikh. He was shot and he was stabbed with a knife on this side.
This is one person.
One person, all one person. But it is arm, chest, head.
Yet whilst there has been much opposition to the exhumation, for one man, it has helped alleviate many years of suffering. A local farmer, Hussein Ahmad, was forced to use his tractor to dump bodies into mass graves. He too has been struggling with the trauma ever since. But back in the US, the case against Colonel Tuke has hit a stumbling block. During the decade-long preparation of their arguments, Warfat's lawyers have been relying on an obscure, centuries-old law known as the Alien Tort Statute. The United States is not a signatory to bodies like the International Criminal Court, which tries war crimes in other territories.
The Alien Tort Statute was originally passed by the first Congress of the United States in 1789. It was the same act that set up the entire court system we have. Very simple statute. It's very, very short. It essentially says that an alien or a foreigner can bring civil action for a tort, which means personal injury, in federal court. It wasn't used for human rights explicitly until, the late 70s.
Instead, American human rights lawyers have relied on the Alien Tort Statute to bring claims against defendants who reside in the U.S. but committed their alleged offenses overseas.
It seemed that human rights litigation was a very open and welcome thing in U.S. courts, right up until the Kiowel decision in 2013.
That ruling, a U.S. Supreme Court interpretation of a case brought by a Nigerian citizen against her government and Royal Dutch Petroleum, has undermined the use of the Alien Tort Statute. The decision was seized upon by Colonel Tukey's lawyer, who then got part of the case against him dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. For now, the legal action will have to proceed under a different U.S. statute, the Torture Victims Protection Act.
Our case will go forward on torture and attempted extrajudicial killing. It will not go forward on crimes against humanity and war crime.
Meanwhile, Jose Pablo's team have invited relatives to examine the clothing they've exhumed to see if they can positively identify the dead.
It is important for them to understand that it is a difficult experience, and I do not want to expose them to something very painful for no reason.
One of them is Zainab Noor. She arrives with her daughter, who was born while Zainab was imprisoned by the regime. She is also now pregnant with Zainab's grandchild. After some argument, they agree that only Zainab should go upstairs to view the clothing. But the difficulty of trying to identify her husband's clothing after all these years immediately becomes evident. The viewing seems only to bring frustration and yet more unhappiness. Zainab's memory loss is a result of the head injuries she sustained while she was tortured in prison. As they are leaving, Zainab's daughter collapses.
It's become very accepted in the psychiatric and psychological circles to recognize that trauma won't go away if you ignore it. And it also won't even just end with the person who was victimized. It can pass to your grandchildren. So it is something that has to be taken seriously. That trauma will live on if it isn't somehow addressed.
The day has come to rebury the dead of Arapsio, and local religious leaders have arrived to collect their remains. They stack the bones at the back of the EPAF bus. The team rides up front. The remains are offloaded and laid out for burial. The atmosphere is subdued. The community pray for the dead. But before they are finally laid to rest, there is confusion over which bodies are which.
Right, but the problem with this is that we still do not know which one is which. Right, but look at this. If you put one there and you put another one here, how do we know which one is which? and understand that.
Soon the confusion envelops the entire event. The relatives question whether the remains are correctly linked to the names of each victim. Jose Pablo and a local official try to placate them.
in ay noqoto hebel hebel oo aanu anaguna halkan la fiixay aanu haysanay aanu ka isla doonano si magaciisa iyo gooniyaba loogu qoro boorarka hadii la yiraahdo halkan waqti dheer ba ka soo wareegtay maskaxda bini'aadamkuna way isbedeshaa.
Upset by the disorder, they want the reburial postponed.
qofku wixii amaarada iyo waxa ku jira far sawirka gidis way waxa timid jeelka qayba loogu geyn jiray dharka yaano aabahay laga soo qaado jeelka dharkii loogu bedelay ma garan kara maanta dharkiisii kii aan ku ogaa waa laga bedelay.
In this situation, to identify these people, we would need to go, for example, for a test called DNA. And each DNA test costs a lot of money that nobody can pay. So we at least have to have an idea of who the person may be with the things we have. Dental work, as a sheikh, clothing.
Finally, after a prolonged negotiation, they agree that the burial can recommence.
We'll do it today.
Manta.
Okay, let's. People have to grieve. We need a card now. If they are not able to grieve, and they have not been able to grieve, they won't be able to get anywhere. They got this like pain stuck there, you know. So it's very important, this process of letting go and then dignifying this dead, make them human again, even if human at death.
But digging up the past has not brought catharsis to everyone.
maanta si markaan lafihiisii arkay qalbigaygii ay quruxdiisu ku jirtay waxa bedelay lafihii oo iminka habeenkii markaan hurdo sidaa lafihii baa maskaxdeeda ku duuban mustaqiiqa inaan saamaxo yaa lafta way jabantay ana wax sooba u goysin yaa anoo uur le ay dhibaateeyeen anoo uur le ninkaygii dileen يا نفبحي ويدي بانكو نولاانو نفبحي ويدي بانكو نولا كلبا إن انتو كسامحو إيا وحي لسعودي تونا لغما ياب.
And where some seek relief from the pain of the past, others would prefer justice, revenge even, and they want it close to home.
إنه مريكا جوجو المغلي توكي إنه مريكا جوجو المغلي ده وحو شرفتي سكرانو أمر ما هيصل لكن ده سكر حسني كل مريكان وان مغلي لكن أنا وصل بروندي يو يوغندا يو كوان أن رواندا يو بروندي يو لو كانت دتكي أن سمينا يه وحاسي دل كوجي لو كانه يعني نقول له هانو هلا صوت ترانسفير جريو عرب سهلا نو كانوا هل كي جبيه هلا وحكمه جبيه لو تقتلوا له.
Whether that might ever happen is difficult to predict. Colonel 2K contests the allegations against him, and the eventual outcome of the case is still years off. What is certain is that these are difficult issues for any post-conflict society to grapple with. Winning a single complex legal battle in a foreign country might help bring a sense of justice to the people of Somaliland. But perhaps the best to hope for is that shedding light on these atrocities will stand as a warning to future generations everywhere, that they should never be repeated.